Members of the board, I'm Lori Skowski, Director of... Now it's on. Director of Student Assessment, and my understanding is that the board had requested this particular item. It is a discussion item, so I don't have any actual presentation for the board, but I am here to answer questions you might have about test items or how the STAR items are developed. I also may be relying very heavily on Julie Guthrie from the Student Assessment Division. She oversees the science and math assessment. So between the two of us, I hope we can answer whatever questions you might have.
Ms. Cargill?
So, hi Gloria.
Hi.
Thank you for coming down to visit with us. So what would it take to instruct our test makers to focus on questions that are aimed at the correct answer for a math problem, and then allow students to use whatever process in their head works for them? What would it take to swing the test in that direction? Does it take direction from the commissioner, from the governor? I mean, what would it take for that to happen? How would that decision be made?
Okay, so we can answer any question you can ask. I'm going to try to answer that one.
Yeah. And we know you're the representative, so So thank you for attempting to answer that hard question.
Well, I mean, just a couple of basics. Just the reminder that the items on the assessment simply match or attempt to match the curriculum standards themselves. And so when the curriculum standards talk about processes, that's the clue to the people who write the items, and then the text educators that review the items, and then ultimately TEA staff that determine which specific items go on the test. That's our clue to what we should be measuring. We are measuring whatever the texts are outlining. And so that is, I mean, that's as much as I can tell you about the relationship between the curriculum standards and the items on the test.
Well, and I understand that, because I'm looking at, I don't know what grade it is, maybe the first grade math TEKS, and so, and I see processes within the student expectations. So I understand that all of that is in the TEKS, and that we do require it, and the test is reflecting that. But I also see a lot of student expectations that, talk about solving and skip count by 2s or 5s or, et cetera. And so there is some of that in there as well. And so instead of this heavy focus on the process, I'm not saying don't let the students use the different processes. I'm just saying on the test, there should be a focus on getting the correct answer to a mathematical problem. And I think we're hearing from all across the state that something has to give. So I guess what could our role be in that, or who do we need to talk to, or how can change come about?
And I may have to ask Julie to help with this. My understanding is that it's not one student expectation that talks about process. It's
Right.
multiple ones, and it's throughout. And so our responsibility in designing the assessment is to cover as much the breadth of the curriculum standards, as many as we can. And if the curriculum standards have a focus on process, well then by extension, so will the assessment, because we will try to mirror whatever the curriculum standards are. And whatever emphasis is placed in the curriculum standards, that's the same emphasis, as I think Monica mentioned earlier, the test should not, we don't want to be the drivers of the instruction. It should be the curriculum that is the drivers of instruction. And the curriculum is the driver of the test. The test isn't the driver of curriculum. And so, again, we are trying to mirror what the curriculum standards are.
Yeah. It's a conundrum, because, we we want our students to learn. I'm not saying that they shouldn't learn the 5 processes to solve the math problems, but maybe other board members have it all figured out and I'm just missing it. But yeah. All right, I'll stop for now.
Mr. Rowley?
Oh, still, you're still presiding?
She's coasting over there.
Okay, excuse me. Well, I don't know that I have it figured out, but let me pose this question anyway to maybe clarify. Mr. Houchins, bless his heart, and I mean this seriously. I mean, he's been here, for the last 3 or 4 meetings, and he keeps bringing these issues to our attention and does so in a very poignant and a very, descriptive way. But my sense, and this is my question, I guess, my sense is that it's not the assessments that are creating the issue. It's instead the fact that, for better or for worse, we passed a set of standards back in 2012, I guess, probably thereabouts. It was before I was on the board, by the way, just for the record. That's why I'm clarifying that. No, I'm kidding. But we passed a set of standards that certainly require instruction on processes, and as a result of that, maybe there was an overemphasis on that strand or on that knowledge, but the assessments simply reflect that. And is that what you're essentially telling us? Is that those assessments are reflecting the fact that the TEKS themselves require an understanding of process and not just a correct answer?
Well, yes, that is why the assessments do reflect that. Our questions might reflect that because we're trying to mirror what's in the curriculum standards.
Right. I think you've said that both times that question was posed, and so. But here's the next question. Maybe this is to Monica or to someone. So let's say we wanted to fix this. I mean, let's say that we were to say, okay, there's an issue here. For better or for worse, we followed the experts' direction back at the time when these standards were being proposed and accepted. And aside from the implementation method, because a lot of what I understood was we might have implemented them all across the board instead of incrementally over a period of time. But I'm hearing that that's not necessarily the whole problem. But if we wanted to remedy this situation and wanted to go back and say, all right, we think there's an overemphasis of processes on this set of math standards, and I'm not saying we are doing that, but if we were to do that, how would you go about doing it? I mean, is it kind of like trying to, put the toothpaste back in the tube, or is there actually anything that could even be done?
Well, there are probably any number of things that could be done. One of the things that the board could certainly do is make the decision to revise the standards again. That would involve following your process, identifying individuals to serve on committees, going through, what we're currently doing with English and Spanish language arts and reading, revising those standards, deciding on an implementation date, making a determination about whether the changes that you make are significant enough to warrant new instructional materials, making the decision about whether to proceed with implementation either with or without new instructional materials. And then once you decide on that implementation, we would work with our colleagues to make the appropriate adjustments to the assessment.
Could I follow up on that, Vice Chair? Well, what if, and again, I'm just thinking out loud, which is always dangerous, but what if we were to look at a review of those math standards and an analysis of those standards to determine whether or not they should go through another revision process as a part of our streamlining exercise that we were talking about earlier today? Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you can follow just about any process that you would like to when it comes to adoption of revisions to standards or review of the standards. What would need to be decided is where this falls in priority. I don't believe that we have the resources to support facilitating that kind of review while we're also trying to complete English and Spanish language arts and reading, while we're also trying to begin the streamlining of the science. So you would need to make a decision about whether you bump science and social studies to revisit math, whether you put math in line after science, before social studies, after science and social, like you would have to make all of those decisions. Any decision that you make that would involve any review of the standards, I do feel an obligation to say that doesn't happen overnight. And so folks would just need to understand that it would take some amount of time. Typically, revision processes take at least a year. So if folks are looking for an immediate remedy, I don't know that there's any action that you could take that would provide the immediate action that it sounds like you might be asked to make.
Or just, I was just wondering, even starting the process, what would look like. But that, you've answered that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Bohorich and then Ms. Perez.
So, we've always had the process standards. Previously, they were at the end, correct? I want to make sure I got this
That's right. We've always had, since 1998, when we began implementing the essential knowledge and skills, we have had process standards in the elementary grades. We did move that up into secondary with the 2012 revision. But as far as the process standards for what we implemented last school year, those process standards should not be anything new to educators.
But something has changed, and so this is why I'm trying to understand. I know we moved them to the front in the adoption of the standards. So what has changed with the putting in the, let's just talk elementary since they've been there since the beginning.
So one of the things that has changed, and it was an intent to clarify that those standards were not intended to be addressed in isolation, is that if you look at your knowledge and skill statements, it says the student uses the process standards too. So that language was added to the knowledge and skill statements to explain that the intent was, and if you go back and look even, I believe, at the some of the minutes from that adoption, that the idea was that that the process standards shouldn't be taught and tested in isolation. There was some conversation about that. So there was a decision that we needed to clarify that you select and use a process when you are demonstrating your proficiency in content, and that doesn't happen in isolation. So that's, I think, what I believe the change to be is a clarification of what the intent of the process standards is. You have process standards in science as well. You heard some testimony this morning from some of the science folks who felt that it was important that not be lost. You've got some similar language in social studies, so this is not a concept that is unique to math, but the way that it's been presented may have shifted in those ways.
So just following up on that, so did we do the same thing with the science standards that we were talking about? With that same phraseology, that
No, ma'am.
standards, okay, we did not do that.
That happened most recently with math.
Just the math. Is math the only one that we've added that specific requirement to the standards?
I believe so.
That you must use the processes to do such and such?
I believe that math is the only instance where you see that in the knowledge and skill statement.
So, then following up on that, because when I looked at the chart that showed me the number of processes for every single question, there'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 processes included from the process group for each question on the latest chart that I saw about the STAR exams. So why was it decided that so many multiple processes? Because usually what that means is you've got, added level of rigor when you add more processes. And so I'm just kind of wondering why so many multiple process standards for every single question.
I'm not sure what chart it is that you're referencing.
It's the one on the website that says how many processes are listed for every single question, or was tested on every single question.
Well, maybe you should explain.
So it shows all the questions, and then it says how many processes were included.
And Julie Guthrie said, has joined me because she knew what chart it was that you were referring to.
Yeah, you have to
She
look
has
for
a
it.
copy of it, of course. But one thing, one possibility, and I'll have Julie can also talk to this better than I can, is that it's possible that a lot of the process items, the knowledge and skill statements, are readiness standards, and those are tested at a higher rate than the supporting standards are.
Right.
We have more items that measure them.
70%, is that what you're doing now?
It's about 65, 35.
65,
yeah,
35,
so
okay.
roughly. I mean, that's what we try to maintain.
Okay.
And so you may see that more items are pulled from those student expectations because those student expectations happen to be readiness ones. But Julie can also address any other specific questions about that.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the number of processes for every single question.
Good afternoon. As Gloria said, my name is Julie Guthrie. I'm the Director of Mathematics and Science Assessments for the Student Assessment Division. And so as Monica said, the process skills have been around for a long time, and we have incorporated them into the assessment program since 1998 in some way, shape, or form. So with the shift, with this new curriculum and the shift in moving them from the back to the front, the shift in the emphasis on the process standards, where they're written in every single knowledge statement, the student is expected to use the mathematical process standards to add, to subtract, to multiply, etc. And then even in the opening paragraphs that talk about the intent of the process standards to weave other knowledge and skills together, etc., all the language in the TEKS that you guys adopted led to a different shift in the assessment program as well. So when we brought in our advisory committees to relook at the STAR Mathematics Assessment Program based on the changes to the curriculum to see what changes needed to happen for the assessment program, we talked about how we were doing process codes where we would look at the content that it addressed, that the item was written to address, and verify that it addressed that. And then we would ask educators to look at the process to see if it was addressing that as well, or included or incorporated that. And there was always a lot of debate about, well, it does that one, and that one. Well, in the previous version of the STAR Mathematics Assessment, we were only allowing one process code. But because we had lots of conversations about how any one mathematics item could do multiple things, when we moved to and the shift in the process codes changed, we talked about that with our educator advisory committees. And one option was to just not report the process standards, but the educator committees didn't like that. Some of the comments they talked about was that the multiple process codes enriches conversations around the teaching. If they're not reported, they could be lost. More information is better. They didn't like just targeting one process code. They liked the multiple process codes because it helped with instruction. So that's why one of the shifts with what we saw in the curriculum changed how we treated process codes in the assessment. And so at that point we decided to, instead of just tagging a specific item to one process code, we would tag it to however many it applied to. And so if you've seen the process codes, you can understand that there are ways and specific items in which multiple process codes could be attached to any particular item. The process codes are are communicating mathematical ideas. Well, I would hope that every single one of our test questions would be communicating some mathematical idea. So pretty much every one of them has some kind of communication code attached to it. One of them is select tools, including manipulatives, technology, estimation. And so when we have a geometry problem that they might need to go reference something on the reference material, like a perimeter formula, then we will give it that code. If there is, well, the B code, it says use a problem-solving model that incorporates analyzing given information, formulating a plan or strategy, determining a solution, justifying the solution, evaluating the problem-solving process, and reasonableness of the solution. As an assessment person, I would hope that every single one of our problems, that kids would go and evaluate the problem, make a plan of attack. And so almost every single one of our questions has the B code. So there are multiple codes, and you're right, when we report our student expectations, which is the document you were referring to, we not only code it to a content standard. Is it testing multiplication? Is it testing a geometry skill? Is it testing a personal financial literacy skill? But we also say, what process codes is it touching or incorporating as well? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does answer the question. But I guess, the thing that concerns me is that if we've been so specific about, every single problem must address, I guess I wouldn't read it that way, that, whatever the standard, even though you want it to be taught that way for assessment purposes, I guess the pure math is a part of it. We want kids to be able to have enough problems that show that they have automaticity with their just the plain out multiplication or addition, subtraction, division, whatever it is, that to me does not, I guess I wouldn't take the assessments should have to be completely all about the process. Even if it's in the standards that we want that taught, I guess I'm a little confused as to why there's not a pretty good amount of the assessment that is really about what can they, get to, particularly in those younger ages, and get through that are just straight math problems.
So every single one of the problems on the assessment address a content standard.
Right.
One of the ones that aren't process, and they're coded to that. And then the process codes are layered on. One of the things that I think is part of the concern that you guys have been hearing over the last year or so is that there's process codes or process skills that are embedded into the curriculum. They've been moved from the back to the front. There's 7 specific student expectations. But that's also been intertwined with some of the student expectations that talk about representation or talk about modeling. And sometimes those words are used with methodology, and sometimes those are thought of as process. There are a lot of content student expectations that have us representing, have the students in instruction representing, like we just heard from the testimony, and therefore that's what our test questions do, because we're aligning to the curriculum. That's separate from the process code conversation.
So how much of the representing the answer have we embedded in the standards?
Well, as Gloria mentioned, we do assess most of the curriculum, and so there are some of those representation skills throughout the curriculum, all the way into algebra, because one of the big skills in algebra, like was mentioned, is we want students to be able to go from verbal to graphic to tabular to an equation. So that's one of the big skills in Algebra 1, is to work with all of those representations. And so there are skills throughout the curriculum that lead to that. But to answer your question, when the advisory committees came in and looked at the new curriculum and looked at some of those representation skills, more often than not, they chose to use the actual calculation skill as the readiness standard, or the one that would get the focus in the assessment, as opposed to the representation skill. So for example, the one that was brought up just a minute ago about represent multiplication, doing this, and this, that was a supporting standard. The one that says solve multiplication problems is the readiness standard. So that's the one that you might see 2 or 3 questions on the test, and maybe you might see one that's the represent.
So just one more question.
Sure.
The reading area, that's become, that we've heard a lot of complaints about students, especially the young students. You know, they're still trying to get their reading up and that sort of thing. And so it's frustrating for them to, you know, have a test full of reading, especially those 3rd grade and, you know, that sort of thing. So kind of how did we end up being heavy on the reading?
So just to clarify, all students taking a grade 3 math test can get reading assistance. All they have to do is raise their hand and say, "What's that word?" And the teacher can come over and help them read that word on the test. But you're right that the progression that we've seen over the last decade or so is to incorporate math into real world problems. And we see that to some extent in the curriculum. I don't even know if I could say several or many. There are student expectations that say do this in a mathematical situation and in a real world problem. And so part of that's embedded into the curriculum, and then part of that's from the assessment.
I mean,
They
it
phrase it in
appears to
different
me
ways.
there's a little more flexibility on how we put those tests together than we're employing, though, from what you're saying, and or do that. So I guess I'm just saying it just seems like there's a bit of common sense in some of this that seems to be, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, yes, I understand we want our kids to work at a higher critical thinking level, and I get that, and that's why those critical thinking skills were put in there. But also, you know, there's some basic skills that we just flat out want to know. Do they know how to do your basic skills that we want them to just get out? And we want to have some way of assessing that. But when we tie everything to big, long reading problems and, you know, graphs and those little bar things that they do, and, you know, I mean, I don't know. I would hope that there's a bit more flexibility on the testing side of it to consider both as important, not just it's all about the process. So anyway, that's just my comments on that.
Okay, members, I have Ms. Perez, Mr. Mercer, Ms. Hardy, Mr. Maynard, Ms. Beltran, and then Ms. Cargill, who's already spoken once. So, okay, Mr. Mercer.
Okay, I have 2 questions, one for staff about process and one for legal and methodology. And bear with me, I want to tie into what Mr. Rowley's saying. I've been hearing for 8 meetings now, I think. I want to solve the problem. And I have I call her Mig, a mom in glasses in Comal County. We discussed this, and basically I could tell her frustration. Great person, but really frustrated. She's tired of hearing about process standards got moved front to back. There's 7 of them. They're on page 1. There needs to be in the back. And tying to Mr. Rowley saying, I don't want any more explanations. I appreciate all that. I want to solve the problem. And so when I talk about process or methodology being my legal question or process, is there a way to, in business we do it all the time, we have a very limited focus, emphasis. We want to open, we want to move this from the shift from the back to the front, move it now front to back. Delete the word process. I don't know, when I look online in 1st grade, math standards, the student uses mathematical process to acquire and demonstrate. The student applies mathematical process standards to present, represent, and compare. I mean, in 1st grade, I see it there. So please bear with me, staff and members. I want to solve a problem. I don't want to hear any more about what it is. I know what it is. I want to tell my parents that this board saw it. So the first question, is there a way? If the answer is no, then I go to my methodology question. Is there a way we can do a limited focus, open the TEKS, and just say we just want to simply maybe just move those new emphasis that was moved back to front, move it now front to back. And maybe that's at least a start right there. Is there a way to open the process in a very limited focus, not have all the committees set up, not calling, experts, and just say, we found a problem. This is the problem. We want to have a limited focus. I think that Mr. Rowley was leading us that way. Can we open it and just solve that limited focus? And maybe it is as simple as moving the process standards back to where they were before in the back. Staff, is there a way to do that without involving the whole world?
Mr. Mercer, you can certainly make amendments to the rules without involving the whole world. If you want to take action to amend your rules, then we would bring that to you in a series of 3 meetings. Simply moving the process standards from the first knowledge and skill statement to the end is not going to solve your problem because they're still there. So you could certainly do that, but it's not going to have an impact on the way that they're implemented.
But I mean, if we could, well, that was an example, but if we could say the focus is on process standard, that's it, nothing else. We're not touching realignment, we're not doing anything vertically, we're not doing, anything else. We're just saying somewhere we could, I know the attorneys here, Thomas and Marty, could define it where we have a very defined focus like we do in business all the time. This is it, very limited scope. We want to fix the process standard problem we have, if that was a way. And the second question, Vaughn, they brought up a question from one of our statutes about methodology. Have we passed that? If we are in danger of prescribing a methodology, the witnesses alluded to that, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not sure what that means.
So your statute prohibits you from adopting a methodology or the time spent by a teacher or student on a particular task or subject. The statute, however, does not provide a definition of methodology. So I can't tell you statutorily what that exactly is. However, the statute does, right after that section, specifically authorize you to require laboratory instruction in secondary science or require a specific amount of or percentage of time in secondary science courses. So those do appear to be what would fall within methodology. So given that we have a dearth of information, at least statutorily wise, what methodology is, I would defer you to your academic experts, but ultimately you are the policymaker on this, and you will decide what methodology is within the frameworks, of course, of any statutory definition that is there, or if there is any case law, which I'm not aware of.
Well, thank you, Vaughn. And just members, I don't want to spend the next 6 years telling my parents next time. I want to tell them I think, Marty, if I'm giving you the wrong word, but I think you were saying, can we solve the problem? We keep on hearing it. And I still believe that whatever the word process or standards in back to front or whatever, there's some way, I think, I understand first, second, third reading that, Madam Chairman, if we could appoint some of our best attorneys to say, can we do a limited focus on process and at least be able that I can tell my voters we're going to fix the problem. Hey, it takes a first, second, third reading, as Monica suggested, yes. Well, I'm tired of this argument. I'm tired of doing the Texas two-step with my parents. And I want to give them an answer and tell them the board is going to do something. Thank you for the therapy. Appreciate it.
Mr. Maynard, you're next in line for therapy.
I guess my question, and to be clear, so when did remind me when the first iteration of STAR came into being? What school year was that?
2012.
2012. Mm-hmm. And so I think a little bit of this too is that so that, and I suppose in defense of the board at that time, I'm not sure that they really understood how that would really play itself out in the course of that. My question is that so tell me the difference between a process and a methodology as you understand it.
I'm going to have you tell me.
I don't know that I can do that. What I mostly specifically was addressing were the process student expectations, the ones that were moved from the back to the front. And those are treated as a very specific way on the assessment, in which the items are written to a content student expectation, addition, subtraction, geometry, personal financial literacy, and it may incorporate some of those 7 process codes, process skills that are also part of the curriculum. They're just not content standards, they're process standards.
Okay, so when it says select tools including real objects, what does that mean?
So for mathematics in grades 3 through 7, we have a reference sheet that has formulas on it, but it also has a ruler on it. And so there are some of our test questions that actually ask students to measure. So they're supposed to grab their reference material and go measure and use that as a tool.
Okay, and what about, and when it talks about manipulatives, tell me what that is.
We don't specifically have manipulatives for the assessment, so we probably wouldn't be addressing that piece in the assessment arena. Obviously in classrooms they would, in instruction.
Okay, and so I guess that's what I'm really trying to get my mind around is that so when does I mean, I can look and there are lots of definitions for actual mathematical processes, but the way I understand it and how it's what students are being held accountable for appears to me to be more methodology than it does process, because when you are doing pictorial representations and requiring students to do all these different ways to work a problem, at the end of the day, what we want a student to get to is a mathematical process, not for them to necessarily master the method on how to understand that process. Does that, am I seeing, does that make sense to you, and how do you respond to that?
I understand what you're saying, but I do want to go back to kind of what Monica and Gloria already pointed out, is that the assessment is designed to measure the content standards, what's in the curriculum that was adopted. And so I can show you like real examples to help maybe clarify it a little bit. We can certainly look at the document that the previous public speaker sent out. And his very first example, he was talking about an item that we released in summer 2015. And he was gracious enough to write down the codes that we have coded that item, so I'm going to assume that he did that correctly. So this item was written to address 5.3D, which is a student expectation in the TEKS that you guys adopted back in April of 2012. It says, represent multiplication of decimals, now I'm going to paraphrase for a minute, using pictorial models. That is the content standard that we were tasked with addressing. That is the content standard that we told our item runners, please write an item that addresses that skill. Represent multiplication of decimals using pictorial models. That's what this item does. While doing that, and that's what we're testing, and that's what the student would be scored on if this was used on an actual STAR test. Can the student represent multiplication of decimals using a pictorial model? Now, while this item does that, and that's what it's testing, and that's what they would be scored on, it also incorporates 3 process codes. And so we've also tagged it for 3 process codes. It incorporates the B one that I mentioned a minute ago, in which we want them to read the problem, understand what's going on, and make a plan as to how they're going to figure out the answer to the problem. It incorporates the process code, the D code, which is a multiple representation code. We have a pictorial representation of the equation, and we have an algebraic or numerical representation of the problem. So that's why it was given the D process code. And then, of course, it was given the F process code, which talks about representing mathematical ideas. We're representing the idea of a decimal here. What's a decimal number and what's multiplication of a decimal look like? So although it incorporates 3 process codes, it's testing the content code, which some people have called methodology because it's talking about representing decimals. Instead of just finding the answer, that's not what the student expectation said. That's not what teachers are teaching. That's not what this particular thing is testing. It's testing the representation because that's what's written in the curriculum. Does that help you understand it a little bit?
That actually makes it very clear to me. Is that at the end of the day is that we want students to be able to do math and not necessarily do pictorial representations of math. And so that's what we're, at the end of the day, that's what we're really trying to get to. And I guess, and I would ask as chairman and I, you know, what the testifiers are saying is that there's a, you know, below the surface that there's this underlying angst and dissatisfaction from the math teachers, and I'm wondering if the professional organization representing math teachers has done any kind of survey that would be that's not what I said. I said is that I wonder if that professional organization has done a survey of their rank and file to have some sort of sense on how the math teachers that are actually out in the field and doing that, how they really feel about it. But thank you for your responses.
Ms. Hardy.
We always hear about Julie Guthrie, but we never see Julie Guthrie, so I am glad to see you.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy.
I have several things I would like to comment and ask you questions in regard to this. One is, as a student, I was not a very good math student, and I remember working the questions all the way down the page till I got to the dreaded word problem. And the word problem I would struggle through and often didn't get it correct, but that was what I hated. Math now is more considerate of the fact that the word problem equates to critical thinking.
Correct.
Which it did back then. That's why I was probably not doing well on it. But that is what we have pushed, this idea of raising the bar. Now, I'm here to tell you, there are, for every one parent you've heard in this audience, I can bring in probably 500 teachers who would back up what we're doing right now with the Texas TEKS in mathematics. I kid you not. Whenever we did this, and some of you were here, you know that we had math people in the audience every time, and those same people, those math people, supported what we did and were in favor of it. And most of it was from Singapore math. Why Singapore math? Because the students who studied under Singapore math were knocking the socks off of every international math test there was. So our people went looking for where are they getting those standards that have raised the bar. I hear that all the time. So we raised the bar, and what do? We hear all kinds of complaints. Oh my gosh, it's too hard. Granted, many of the students, and this is one of the big fears, because we couldn't gradually move the math in, we had to do it overnight. So there were a lot of kids in the ranks of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade who, unfortunately, and I hope they took this in consideration whenever you were doing the test, that these were walking wounded because they simply moved around a lot of the standards and they may have missed some different points along the way. But the overall movement that we have right here in mathematics is representation of what the mathematicians, math world people, the math professors at the university and so forth are supporting this exact process that we're going through here. Not that you can work a computation, but that you actually understand and can apply that to real world experience. And excuse me, but they collaborate on these things too. And so this is where we are, but we supported this a mere, 4 years ago. Some of you weren't here when we supported it, and so you don't take credit for it. But I'm here to tell you, that was the first time we got a buy-in from teachers across the state, and I believe it was 300 teachers who regularly debated and pushed back and forth with these TEKS before we ever approved them. So I feel like that this is, granted there are probably some kids who got lost in the struggle, and we will also go back to the fact that there are many teachers who don't have the mathematical background and understanding to be able to do the teaching that they're required to do. And that's very unfortunate, but that's how the cow ate the cabbage. And so we have those teachers who would complain about it. I know those teachers because I work in a school district and I've seen that. But I'm telling you that this is what the real world would be, the expectations in the field of mathematics. And we followed suit with the idea of raising the bar, and now we feel like we're trying to back off of that, and I just don't think that's the case. Thank you.
I want to raise the bar to Ms. Beltran.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I wanted to make actually a very similar point to what my colleague just expressed. So I would just caution us as a board to take next steps based on very limited information that has been presented to us, at least being a relatively new member. We've heard from one parent multiple times, which is valid. I appreciate the time that he has spent to show us his concerns. But I do think that we should consider a broader audience than that. And even if you have heard in your districts anecdotally, I don't think that's sufficient for us to warrant changes in our assessment system or changes in our standards and curriculum without first consulting educators and experts in math. And I keep drawing the parallel, and that we had some questions about why aren't we just asking kids to give us an answer, right? So memorize your timetables, memorize your division, whatever, give us an answer. I don't think that's what we should only be expecting for our kids. I think part of, and I wasn't here for the math adoption, but I would imagine that part of the reason that we want some of these other process standards is because we're actually working towards helping kids understand higher level math and reasoning. If you think of algebra, it's very abstract, right? You can't necessarily always just say, well, it's like 2 times 3, I know the answer to that. You actually have to go through some logic and some process thinking. And I think from what I can tell, the math standards help to build that in our students, which I think is a good step, and I think it's a step in the right direction. And I'm drawing parallels to, if we were to ask students in social studies to just give us the dates of historical events, and we didn't ask them to think more critically and perhaps take on the perspective of one particular stakeholder versus another, or to reference other documents to write something about what that historical event, I think that would be a disservice. And essentially, I see a lot of parallels with that in this conversation of we don't want to just ask our kids to memorize their timetables. We don't want to just see answer A and click it off and move on to the next question or the next content area. I think it really this discussion warrants a lot more conversation. I don't want to take action, again, based on just some anecdotal conversations that people have had. I personally, if we're going to share anecdotes, I'll share my own. I haven't heard any concerns about this from any parents. And I would venture to guess that if the experts decided on this, and if you as a board, if you were here, decided that this was the best step, I would venture to guess that we would potentially land in the same place in terms of looking and having these kinds of standards in our in math. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Before I go to the members that have spoken once already, I want to ask a question. There was a concern raised earlier about one child using the correct process but getting the wrong answer, getting it correct, versus another kid that got the right answer but the wrong process and got it incorrect. Is that on a state assessment, or would that? My guess is that's a local teacher's test, or is there anything on the state's tests that would give a student a correct answer for arriving at the wrong answer but using the correct process?
Since this is brand new and we haven't released a test that addresses the new curriculum, I would assume that his example was from a classroom assignment.
Okay. And Ms. Cargill.
Well, and I do want to remind the board that this item has been on the Committee on Instruction for quite a while. I'm not sure how long. And we had how many hours of testimony. So, and I understand other board members can't, you're in your own committee meetings. But so we have heard from many more people than just, the ones here today. And I guess the last thing that I want to do is just stop with this today, because I don't think that's giving our constituents answers. And Monica, I did have a question for you. At some point, we tweaked some TEKS. Was it math TEKS, and we appointed just a small panel to look into it, or what? Remind me what that was.
So you did some years back when the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards were first approved. The board did go back and do some minor refinements to a couple of the grade levels in courses in mathematics to ensure that the Texas CCRS were appropriately embedded.
Okay.
And we did use a smaller group of individuals to help with that work.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering about that. So, and I'm action oriented too. I've heard several of you say that. So whether it's, a survey like Mr. Maynard recommended, or a long time ago, Mr. Rowley, you mentioned something about a study, or I just still like to get more information, because for the time I've been on the board, and I guess it's my 12th year, I'll admit it, I have never seen a reaction like this from our parents and constituents. I will say that. And I was, I was in great support of math TEKS because I was there, and the math community did want it, but sometimes there are things that happen that you don't quite foresee. And so I just wish that there was something that we could at least take a step to look into this more, is what I wanted to say. So.
Mr. Rowley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I agree. I mean, this agenda item is a discussion about the assessments, but I think the conclusion that I'm drawing, I don't know if everyone else is, that it's not an assessment issue, that it is a standards issue. And anecdotally, I have had my email inbox burned up by parents, mostly parents. I don't know about any teachers or educators, mostly parents complaining about the standards. And yeah, I'm not advocating an overthrow of those or even necessarily a revision of those, but at least if there is a perspective out there that says, okay, this is, yes, they're more rigorous. Yes, we're emphasizing process, but we're supposed to. We should do that. Then great. I just want to hear that. And so what I'm frustrated, I guess, to some extent, is that I'm hearing anecdotally a lot of consternation with regard to those standards, and I would just like to hear from the experts and from those folks that apparently were advocating these standards at one time. Are we doing the right thing? Is this just heartburn as a result of new standards and a new approach? Or should we really look at tweaking them? I'm not talking about a total revision, but tweaking them in such a way that that we're making sure we're not losing an entire generation of kids trying to adopt a set of standards that may not have been the best course. And this is a discussion item, but I guess my conclusion would be I'd like to discuss that part of it at some point in a not too distant future.
As we hit the 1.5 hour mark on a discussion item, I'll recognize Ms. Beltran, then Ms. Perez, then Chair Bahorich.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just wanted to, I think I'm with you in that I agree it's not an assessment issue, but I actually don't think it's a standards issue either. I think it's an implementation issue. I think that, and that's something that, I think we should consider as we implement new standards in general. But I think this level of rigor requires, as Ms. Hardy said earlier, a significant investment in professional development, a significant investment in thinking about how to implement that and not doing it just overnight and flipping the switch and expecting kids to get there, because that's what you're hearing parents complain about. Is my guess is that it's beyond, if we had some kind of strategy to actually help kids and teachers get there, and it was a reasonable time period and we had sufficient, I'm talking about an ideal scenario here, we had sufficient resources to train teachers and we had sufficient resources to help kids to move them along, then I think we're having a different conversation. I, again, just want to emphasize the point that I don't think it's a problem with assessments. I don't think it's a problem with the standards. I think it's implementation. And if there's anything that we can take action on with regard to that, I'd be very interested in having that conversation.
Ms. Perez.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, member Beltran sort of beat me to the punch. I was going to say just that. I think that it's definitely a matter of implementation. We're looking, and we've had a lot of testimony. I will say, as a member of the curriculum, as a member of the Committee on Instruction, we have heard from about 20 to 30 people, but it's a very concentrated area of Texas that we've heard from. They don't go past 50 miles from here for the most part. And so what I have seen in my district is that I think that these standards are great. I've heard that they're good standards. The problem has been the transition. We didn't time this correctly. We didn't give our educators enough lead time to prepare, and our students, unfortunately, didn't have that. So I think that was something that was, a fault of ours in terms of timing. But again, I don't think it's an issue with standards. It's just a matter of implementation.
Madam Chair.
Yes, so I just had a real quick question on how do you check the Lexile level for the reading part on each grade level to make sure that the exams are, the reading questions that they have to answer are appropriate for their age?
We use multiple readability measures that are applied to every one of the passages that's on the reading test. Lexile might be one of them, but we don't base the overall determination of what the readability level is for the passages on any one methodology. It is use of several. And this is the same thing that we have used over time with the assessment program. In addition to the readability level that is run on each one of the passages, we also, all the passages go before teacher committees. And there have been times when the educators who are teaching the grade and subject that the items are meant to assess, might tell us that they think that the passage is inappropriate, that it's too difficult. And if we do hear that from our educator committees, then we have moved the passage to another grade and then tried the items out on those students. But it is not any one method that we use to determine readability.
So I'm unfamiliar with that. So is it something that you write? I don't know how you check for Lexile level anyway. So how do you? The readability, like what does that mean? Is there some kind of program? Is there some kind of...
Yes, I think, and again, I'm a little bit out of my area of expertise here, but there are programs that look at length of words, number of words in sentences, the complexity of the sentences, and so it's taking that information and determining what would be the readability level.
Okay, so you run it through
Lexile does something similar, but again, it's various methods that all try to measure readability.
So you run it through some kind of automated process as part of what you do.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to know. And then I will just say, including, I've heard from several legislators, to be honest, personally, regarding this issue because of the complaints they're hearing at the coffee shop. Most notably, the House Chair of Education in the House, who has spoken to me more than once about what he's hearing from the grandpas gathering in the coffee shop. So I would just say that I think there are a lot of people that are hearing, not just us, about this, and so it is something that I do think we need to think about. What is an intelligent approach to furthering this conversation in a productive way that we can get some help. The other thing is we've got the math academies that are coming up. And I think those hopefully will be helpful as we're looking at training and professional development and that sort of thing. Because I think there's no doubt that most of the educators in the field now were not trained this way. And so this is something they are learning to do because they were not trained this way either. So anyway, I think those are important things to make sure you know.
And before I call on Ms. Hardy, that's what I've heard from the majority of the parents that I've heard from. The concern is I can't help my kid do their math anymore because I wasn't taught this way. And that is a frustration. And now I try to keep in mind that my father went to the state UIL contest in slide rule. And so every now and then something comes along that we do start doing things a different way. And so it makes it hard for those of us in this generation to teach the next generation. That's not to say there aren't challenges out there, but that's what I've heard is parents are having a hard time helping their kids with the new stuff. And they haven't had the benefit of the instruction. But Ms. Hardy?
I was going to go for brevity and just say implementation was my thing, as my fellow board members had said. But I will say that, and some of you have heard this before, I tutor an individual child in a school, and the first time I helped him with his math, I did it wrong. And I was so embarrassed that I couldn't figure out what to do, so I resorted to doing multiplication tables. And the teacher said, that's great because it made his math work better. He improved his math by having that background. And I don't know whether the parents are spending the time doing that background stuff, but that's what they need to be working on because it really is very difficult to understand. If you're used to doing things like carrying and borrowing, those do not exist anymore in the math world. But we can't hold our children back because we want to borrow and carry. We just have to say, okay, someone greater than I in the area of mathematics knows what they're doing and we're going to follow their lead because I'm telling you down the road it will pay off. It is an implementation problem. I'm not even critical of the teachers who don't know how to teach math that way, because they were taught the same way I was taught. And so it is a big learning curve, and it is such a curve that it's not one of those things that could be picked up in a year or two. It literally takes several years, and it hurts. And the math people had reservations about this when they did it to begin with, because they knew it was going to be a very arduous process to get through this. And we're in this arduous process. Some of you that were here for when that was done know what I'm talking about. Those of you who have joined on later are seeing the birthing pains of all this, and are concerned and upset, and I can appreciate that. But I'm telling you, I think we're on the right pathway, and we need to give it some time. Thank you.
Please say nobody. Oh, I mean, excuse. Yes, Miss Melton Malone, you haven't spoken yet.
Sorry about that. No, I was just going to add to that just a little bit. I have spoken with several parents, well, a lot of parents, and teachers as well. And when we would get into the discussion of what the problem was, almost every time when I would say to them, do you think it's an actual standards problem, or do you think it was the implementation of it? And they'll stop and say, it was the implementation. We didn't have time for everybody to get caught up to where they need to be. And then I have been able to mention to them that we are going to be having the math academies. And those of you who are teachers know summertime is precious, precious time. And they are more than ready and willing to go to the math academies so that they can be taught this new process. And the ones I've had an opportunity to visit with seem to think that that will help considerably for them to be able to learn the process, then to go back and help their kids. And so just point of information, we do have some teachers that are looking forward to those math academies so that they can go and get instruction that they can take back to their kiddos.
Ms. Miller?
I was not here those 2 years, but what I'm picking up and what I'm hearing is that you all on this board who were here, you made a mistake. You really did. And I'm sick of hearing your defense, okay? Quit defending and blaming the children and the parents. It's about the kids. My heart goes out. Doesn't your heart go out when you hear the parent come up, whether it's 1 or 2 parents or 3 or 20? I mean, this is their lives. This is so important to them. We need, and just like our former chair, Ms. Cargill, she wants to do something about it. I do too. Marty does too. We're all want to do something. Let's fix this thing. Okay? Granted, we can't do it overnight, but the very idea that when you stepped out and voted for something brand new, especially like math, and you didn't gradually work through it and do plenty of professional development and get the teachers up to speed, and then the parents and get them to learn about it, okay? And then start it, okay? Then I think it probably would have been implemented and people would have accepted this new math or this new approach to math, okay? I can remember when we had what we call the fuzzy math. Remember, David, the fuzzy math? Okay, it didn't last too long, okay, because a lot of the parents were pretty upset about it and the kids. The thing is that this is the new thing on the block with math, and it's here to stay, and all the math experts, I'm just stunned that the math teachers and experts didn't warn you all to slow down and let's come at it with a little more professional approach, so that our kids could learn this new math, okay? Because it is about the children. And we want them to know, be the best and move up to that critical thinking and move into college. Absolutely, we're all for that. But bless their hearts, we've got to help them, and we've got to help the parents, you all. So whatever we can do, Ms. Cargill, Marty, Monica, let's do it. Let's find a way to do it. Please.
Okay. Ms. Perez has spoken twice. Is there objection to her speaking a third time on this? You only spoken once? Oh, sorry, Ms. Perez.
I will be very short. I just want to make very, very clear that, and I'll speak for myself, and I won't speak for my colleagues, but I'd like to believe that we are not blaming parents, we are not blaming students. This is not what that is, and my heart goes out for those students, ma'am, when we have to go back and tell them, we don't believe that you can do this, so we're going to have to change the standards and lower those expectations. That's who my heart goes out to, those kids who I truly believe can meet these standards. It was a blunder on our part, but I think that as long as we keep these standards in place and we offer the support where it needs to be in terms of professional development, our kids can do it. I absolutely know our kids can do it.
Madam Chair, after thoroughly discussing this discussion item, I'm handing the gavel back to you with a smile. On my face.
Absolutely. I think I could take it up. Members, I'd like to just, I'm sorry. What? Oh. Yes, great job. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Members, I want to take just a 10-minute break here, and let's get back together at, let's do 25.